Hi, welcome to the second part of the introduction to the macroeconomics course, chapter of the introduction to economics course, basically. So let's continue. Well, I should say that I have discussed the Keynes and basically the way he has actually developed, the way he actually has built his main core ideas. Well, I should mention Malthus and Marx has some similar ideas in their books, and basically Malthus has similar idea, which was basically based on the demand and demand created crisis. Because he doesn't say describe in detail the pessimism and the way the investors stop investing and don't invest, but he just say in some cases the investors or the capitalists just think that it's not the right time to invest. He doesn't explain this in more detail. That's why his ideas did not become very popular at this time. And his remedy was basically, he says the society should give more money to the aristocrats. Why? Because aristocrats spend all the money they have, so they create demand. So basically, you should give the money to the people who certainly will create the demand. Well, Marx is famous with his crisis theory. That's why all Marxists are famous with predicting crisis. Of course, the Marxist some crises they predict are not fulfilling, and especially the end crisis, the crisis that will basically change the anti-capitalist system. That's not easy to predict, certainly. But having thought about that, for Marx, the main crisis of capitalism doesn't come from the demand side of the economy, but the supply side of the economy. So the supply, the way the production is done and distributed, is the main thing that creates crisis. That actually creates the major problem of the capitalist system, actually. But on the demand side, there are also there is also possibility of crisis. So capitalism also, besides this long run problem, also has various different types of short run problems. And one of the short run problems he has described was actually also demand crisis. But he pretty much thinks that those crises are necessary for the capitalist system. Those crises are actually what capitalism needs to cure itself, create a rebirth of the system, solves its problem. So when I say capitalism needs crisis, it means actually without those crises, if you try to postpone those crises, you cannot solve certain problems the system has. Which means the attempts to postpone the crisis might be successful for a while, but it will just avert the crisis, basically. Might be successful for a while, but the crisis will be just postponed, and postponed crisis will be mostly, according to Marx, more severe. And those ideas can be discussed by the Marxist economists also. They are discussed, and sometimes they are also discussed by the Keynesian economists. By the way, let me also briefly talk about the way Keynes has developed his ideas. Keynes actually has, in 1930s, after the Great Depression, where the basic economic models were questioned, created a PhD student group in Cambridge University, and the group was called Cambridge Circus, and the major theories and models were basically discussed and kind of built up in that group. And most of the economists in that group become later famous economists also. But in 1940s and 50s, basically, Keynes himself has basically written just words in his models. But later his models has become analytical. Mathematics has entered to his basically later economists have created transformed his models to mathematical models, and there is this mainstream Keynesianism was born. But this mainstream Keynesianism was disputed by the students of Keynes, who called that mainstream Keynesianism bastard Keynesianism, and then they built a new another Keynesian school called post-Keynesian school, and actually kind of diverted from at least the main Keynesian idea, and now claim even in the long run, capitalism might not be able to, the economic system might not be able to create the best possible results, and maybe intervention in different ways or coordination in different ways might be useful even in the long run. Meanwhile, of course, in 1970s, the mainstream Keynesianism was also challenged by the neoclassical school macroeconomic branch, which is sometimes called neoclassic school. Well, for a while, neoclassical school was dominant. Then, and their critics were dominant. But then, there was another Keynesian school was emerged, which was called New Keynesian School. So now there are two different Keynesian schools actually: New Keynesian School and the post-Keynesian School. And pretty much you have also this mainstream Keynesianism, and it's still very strong actually. The models were challenged, but still the models are in the mainstream. The ideas are still along which at least the major New Keynesian and New Classical school ideas are evolving actually. Anyway, well, besides Keynes and his models, you also have the growth as one subject, which was actually a subject that was studied a lot by early economists, starting from Adam Smith, Ricardo, and then Marx, of course. But starting with 1940s, basically, after the Great Depression, the stability, the keeping what you have in your hand becomes the most important thing for the countries. So stability becomes the main focus. As I said, short run becomes the focus, and even in the long run, output is considered, for example, stable in major models. And growth becomes majorly this success subject that was basically studied by or studied to remedy for the developing countries. So it is called. There's a special branch in economics called development, basically. And I have been actually in development class in the university, and there our instructor has taught actually to the Americans who were studying in that class, who were actually less than half of the class. Interestingly, most of the students were students who were national of the developing countries. But he spoke to them. He spoke to the Americans. He said, "You are probably taking this class because you are hoping to go to the developing countries or build relations with the developing countries and become advisors to them. But they are basically mainly raising their own economists now. So they won't hire you unless you specify on a specific aspect of development, for example, agriculture, the role of agricultural development." So that's an interesting point, actually. That's also the people from the developing countries like Turkey, they study development a lot. That's why I also kind of was, I was interested, but I was also a little bit, my interest has decreased after this, actually. I thought I should be concentrated on also some other aspects of the economics, not only development. But anyway, so growth rate, the increase in production and the ways to increase the production is one of the major subject of the development. Also, although of course there are many sides of it. and basically there Solo is the main model there. And Solo basically, this main model basically focus on the idea that returns to investments in time increase in countries, which means actually the countries that are less developed, their returns to investments are higher. So when you invest there, you get higher profits in return. As a result, most countries, the investors will be more likely to invest in those countries, and as a result, basically, the countries who are developing will start to catch up the developed countries and basically take over them. So his model is considered as the main model in the growth or development economics. Although there are challenges to that model also, but still challenges are also evolving around the main model. I mean, they use the main model and add certain aspects to that main model. Anyway, well, money is another subject in the basically macroeconomics, and basically, should I tell you a little bit about the monetary history? Maybe not. Maybe I will leave that. I will leave that monetary history to the money chapter actually. But I will basically talk a little bit on the role of money. Basically, Keynes also mentioned this possibility, but later in 1970s, actually, people start to think that the government, when it directly creates demand or demands goods, that might not be that good for the economic system, because government is actually the demand, the things that government buy might not be the best things for the society. Remember, according to macroeconomics, the consumers should given the decision not to buy. At government, when they buy, even for the general public, it might not be that good. As much as possible, all goods should be made private goods potentially. For example, people should decide whether they need healthcare or not. And well, and as an alternative tool, you had this monetary tools, which means actually you might basically increase or decrease the interest rate in the monetary market to basically create demand. Why? Because when you lower the interest rate, then it is cheap to borrow money, and that might actually increase the investments. So this has emerged as an alternative tool, and was basically briefly talking about Keynes, but in 1970s it was considered as a superior tool compared with the fiscal tool. And in addition to that, also the monetary markets, how the banks run, and how to have a stable banking system, how to make sure that the banks don't go bankrupt, are also subjects of the macroeconomics. The unemployment is another, and labor market is another kind of size subject, but it is also discussed in macroeconomics. And one of the major models is actually on this issue, Phillips curve. We will see that also. That's the fourth major model actually, which is basically discuss the relation between the labor market, unemployment, and the inflation, the money market basically, and kind of defines the optimal level of unemployment also. So it's based on, it kind of supports the idea that some degree of unemployment is necessary for the economic system. So we are coming close to the second 15 minutes of the today's lecture. So see you in the third part.